Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at the latest offering from the Australian-based micro brand. This is the second hour and this is the Giant Stride. So first, for some administrative matters, I do want to note up front, this is a prototype that was loaned into the channel for review. With being a prototype, if you notice any scratches, scuffs, etc. as we go through the video, do note that's attributable to that. Additionally, there will be some changes to the production model, and I'll highlight those as we go through. The biggest one that I want to note up front is there will be a hardened coating that's included on the bracelet in the case that I don't believe is on the production, or this prototype rather, but will be on the production model. The reason that's important to note is any wear you see is not necessarily indicative of what it will be like on the production model. I do expect that one will have great wear resistance overall. First, let's go ahead and address what you get with this watch. Of course, obviously you get the watch itself. It does come standard on this bracelet that we're going to look at here today. Additionally, it does come with a 2-watch pouch. This is not the pouch that you'll get, but it gives you an idea. It's a nice hard zip-up case here, and it does have 2 watch slots, one top, one bottom, flap in between there. It's going to be a fancier texture, and I'll pop that up on the screen so you can see what that will actually look like. Additionally, I don't have a picture of it, but there will be a seatbelt cloth strap that's included along with this as well. Beyond that, this does come standard with a 2-year warranty, so you are going to be covered beyond your standard 1 year. As far as the specs on this one, the case on my calipers is coming in at 42.1 millimeters, and that is measured from the 3 to 9. The bezel does step down ever so slightly and is coming in at 41.9, so it's almost flush, but it does have a very slight step down. The lugs on this is going to be a standard size of 20 millimeters, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. The lug to lug is going to be 46.7 millimeters, and that's measured at the actual lugs itself. As you can see here, it does have FEMO end links, but as we'll talk about, they don't quite sit all the way down, or they don't articulate all the way down. They stop on the case back. So I measured that as well, kind of like a male end link, and that's 50.7. So either way, I think it's pretty size versatile, very short on the lug to lug, or very workable on the lug to lug, despite being the 42 millimeter size. With the FEMO end links, you do still get some articulation there, and 51 I think will work for most wrist, even if you go by the higher measure there. As far as the thickness, I get thinner than they actually specify. This one, including this domed sapphire crystal here, this is coming in at 12.8 millimeters on my calipers. So that's actually to the apex of this crystal. And as I just mentioned there, this does have a domed sapphire crystal, and check out that distortion. We'll look at this more as we go through. That's going to be really a highlight of this one here. This does have pretty generous AR coating, and you'll see, of course, you can get some glare, as is always the case with domed sapphire, but it held up well, and we'll see in outdoor footage and those kind of things, so you can get a better idea of what it's like to live with. As far as the movement on this one, it's going to come with a Sellita SW200, which if you're not familiar with that, it comes with an approximately 38-hour power reserve, has all the features you'd want, hacking, hand winding, etc. So, and that is actually a high beat movement as well for that one. In terms of water resistance, you can see on the dial if it wasn't covered up here, this one does come standard with 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance, right in line with what you'd expect for a typical dive watch. As for the weight, size to my 6.5-inch wrist on this bracelet, it's coming in at 152.4, which I think is right about what you'd expect for a middleweight watch. Definitely this one is not anything that I would call chunky, but it's certainly not a featherweight either. For 42 millimeter size, I think that's right in line with what I'd expect. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the deeper dive for these actual characteristics. So first, let's take a look at some of the colors. Of course, we have the gray that we're looking at today. There is additionally going to be a blue model, a green model, and what they refer to as the bullseye red, which is white with red accents. Really nice looking piece. Shifting over to the actual dial itself, one of the first things that you're immediately struck with this watch isn't just the overall design, it's that dial. It has a lot of depth, a lot of texture going on to it, and this one plays around with texture more than most other pieces that I've seen. In the center, you're going to see what they describe as a wave pattern for that. And then around that, you'll see a railroad track type perimeter, and they describe those concentric circles as being kind of the ripple effect as to go with the Giant Stride theme. So while you have the waves in the middle there, after you jump in, you've got that ripple going around, which I thought that was a cool touch. That's one of the times I don't really talk a whole lot about the theme of a watch, but I thought that was pretty cool. Additionally, as you go around the perimeter, you'll notice there is a very tall inner rotating bezel. So that one, it kind of functions like a rehaut, where you have a nice slope to that, and that adds even more to the overall depth. Additionally, with that inner bezel, and we'll talk about this more, that is of course going to be a functional piece, and that's going to be your top crown at the 2 o'clock position. As for the markers, this one does have a mix of applied markers as well as printed text on both the bezel and of course the dial itself. As far as some of the production changes, you might notice here at the 12 o'clock position, this one does have both the second hour logo as well as it has the name second hour. They will be losing that second hour logo, or the second hour name rather, and only keeping the logo and actually kicking that down. If you go back to the pictures we looked at for the other colors, I did include the ones that have that adjustment. Additionally, at the 6 o'clock position, they will be eliminating the giant stride text that you see on the one we're looking at today. Down at the 6 o'clock position, it does have a date window, and as you can see, it is not color matched on this particular version. Shifting over to the hardware. This one does have custom hardware all the way around. First, with the hands, this has what I would describe as kind of like an exaggerated sword for the hands. You have, particularly with the minute hand, it is very long and slender, and then the hour hand is much more broad. Additionally, of course, the main thing you're going to notice on those hands is going to be the red tips, and that, of course, is on all three of the hands as well. So that does help to really call attention, especially on this matte gray dial that we're looking at today. Each of these hands, as well as the markers themselves, are going to be highly polished. And then as far as the markers is a signature characteristic of second hour. You can see they do go, so it's trapezoidal markers all the way around, but you can see their prominent markers are going to be the 12, 4, and the 8 position. And that's become a signature, as I mentioned, of second hour watches. Additionally, for lume, this one is going to be Super Luminova BGW9, and that is applied to the hands, all three hands, as well as the markers, and even the bezel. And let's go ahead and transition over and take a look at that lume. The lume, as you can see here, it glows quite brightly. I found that this, whether it be natural charge or UV charging, I think presents very well. I've found that it endures, and just in natural charging, picking this up in the middle of the night, there's never been a time that I have had any legibility issues. So I think that's well executed. Shifting back to the watch itself, let's go ahead and look at the bezel. This does have, as we mentioned, a rotating inner bezel, so this is somewhat of like a compressor style for that. As I mentioned, at the 2 o'clock crown here, if we go ahead and unscrew that, you can see that this pops out, and then we can go ahead and rotate that bezel around. It does have a nice smooth action, and of course, one of the pluses anytime you have a compressor style is you never have to worry about having bezel alignment issues. This is infinitely adjustable as you go around, so it's not going to click or anything along those lines. As far as that inner bezel, the perimeter, you can see, of course, does have your pip at the 12 o'clock position, or the default 12 o'clock position. It does have indicators, large indicators, at the 5-minute marks, and then, of course, numerals at the 15, 30, and 45. Additionally, it does have hashes all the way around for your minute markers, though I will note you can see it has alternating between 3 and 4 hashes in between each of those. So we'll talk about that a little more as we go through the rest of the review here. And then, as we saw, this, of course, is loomed all the way around as well. Shifting over to the case itself, as we mentioned, this will come with a hardened coating, which will increase the Vickers rating up to 1200. So that's a significant increase. I believe it's about 4 times the scratch resistance of standard 316L stainless steel, which this is. So that's definitely a nice touch there to keep your watch looking new longer. As far as the texture on this, you can see on the case, it's going to be predominantly a vertical brushing, and this does have brushing on virtually all surfaces, though it does have, to break it up, nice little polished accents you can see on the outside and inside of the lugs there. Nice little touches, and then of course the underside, you can see some polishing there as well. Everything I found is well machined, well applied all the way throughout. The case shape, you can see it has somewhat of a slab type here, though it of course does curve in for your lugs, and then it does have a very sharp downturn for the lugs themselves, and we'll talk about that more as we get on in the review as well. Shifting over to the aerial view of the lugs, these lugs, and one of the things I mentioned we'd revisit, is the 20 millimeters. Most of the time I would expect to see on a 42 millimeter watch, I'd expect to see 22 millimeter lugs. With this one, with having 20 millimeter lugs, you can see it really gives it a curving slope, so it makes it kind of almost like a swoop to me with the overall shape, and I think that adds some visual appeal to it, and I think it also helps to make this more small wrist friendly. So between the short lug to lug as well as the smaller bracelet, I do think this is more size versatile than a lot of 42 millimeter watches would be. Shifting over to the crown side, you can see of course this does have a dual crown design here. And with the crowns, These are going to be both coming in at 6.9 millimeters, so nice, easy to grab size there. Additionally, of course, as you already saw, both of these are going to be screw down crowns. And then the threading on these, I of course didn't talk about that, but the threading on this has been very smooth, and that's true on both of the crowns. So I think that's well machined, seems to work well. The gasket, no interference or resistance there, so that's a good job. And then, of course, as you can see here, this does have signed crowns for both. And both of these, as we saw in the loom footage, are actually going to be loomed for that too. So they have nice different patterns between the two. And I think that's a great job overall for that, and easy to distinguish those even in the dark. As far as the pattern and texture for this does have a nice knurling pattern for this. You can see it's kind of like a gear or ridges into that, and then it gets gradually less deep as it goes throughout. But I found this is very easy to grip a hold of, no slipping whatsoever, nice size. I like those. Switching over to the case back. This, as you would expect for a dive watch, this does have a screw-in case back. And then, as you can see here for the pattern, I would describe this as a pretty artistic type piece here. You know, it's not the most fanciful in the world, but I love the fact that it's going with the giant stride maneuver there. You have on the diver itself, you can see that there is kind of some etching there with that one to give a little more depth beyond just the cutout. And then, of course, going into the water itself. The texture of this. There's a lot of different use of texture. You, of course, have the mirror polish, as you can see here on the diver. You've got some of that on the waves as well, and some on the perimeter. But then you also have a mix of brushing. And then what I would assume is either a sand or bead blast that's in the middle here. Additionally, on the production version, it should be noted, while I have found this to be, despite the depth, it's actually very smooth as well. But on the production version, there's going to be even more contouring to this case back, which should make it even more comfortable. Shifting over to the bracelet, this one does have a taper to it, so it's a 2mm taper. Starts at 20 millimeters at the top, does taper down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. As you can see, and as we discussed, this does have full brushing all the way through, and of course will be coated. This one is going to be an H-link style design for this, which I'm a fan of H-link bracelets. I find they have good articulation and drape. As you can see here, it does contour nicely to the wrist, and I think makes it very comfortable. Additionally, this is going to be secured with screw-in pins, so nice easy changes. Do remember to put a dab of Loctite though, and to check to make sure they're tight out of the box. Always a good tip there. Shifting over to the clasp, you can see this is branded, so this is signed here, and it is just a double pusher design, no fold over keeper there. This is a fully milled clasp, and as I believe was the case with the Mandala as well, this one has, it's not open in the middle, so it's a smoother up against the wrist for that despite being milled. This one that we're looking at here today does only have 3 micro adjustments, but the production version will have 4 micro adjustments, so that's going to be another change. All right, so that gives us a better idea as to the overall characteristics of the watch itself. Let's go ahead and bring in a couple others so we can get an idea of what this looks like as far as some comparisons here. So this is next to kind of going with the gray color here. This one is a forged carbon 42mm Zellos Swordfish, and this is their titanium version. That kind of gives you an idea as far as the overall sizing and presentation with rotating bezel versus an inner rotating bezel. I think visually this one does look larger as far as dial presence overall, despite the fact that this one is actually a little more svelte for packaging. Then putting this next to, this is a 41mm, and this is the Wise Hitman we recently looked at, and this gives you an idea as far as overall presentation for those two. All right, so that's kind of an idea as to how this one stacks up, what the specs are overall, and some of the deeper characteristics. Let's go ahead and get into what I personally think are some of the positives, some of the critiques or items that I would like to see changed, and then overall summary. So first, for some of the positives. As I mentioned before, this one I think has absolutely beautiful dial. I love the use of texture throughout. I think the dial colors are nice. I think despite the fact that it's a matte finish, it doesn't look dull at all, and I think it helps all of the markers and hands to pop even more. But that dial texture, I mean, the wave pattern, very nicely applied. That outer perimeter, I think absolutely gorgeous. Overall, I just think it's a good looking watch. The crystal. The crystal distortion, I mentioned we'd be revisiting this, and I do talk about this a lot anytime we have this kind of effect going on. But look at that distortion, just such a cool look. And what I've found for this, I'm hoping this can capture it, though I doubt it. You get almost a 3D effect. So despite the fact that the center of the dial is cut into it, it almost looks like it's popping off the dial with that distortive effect there. But straight on, you don't get any of that distortion, which I think is the perfect mix for having a playful watch, but that's still functional and legible. Speaking of legibility, this one, especially with the white on this particular gray model, but additionally with those red tips I think on every model, this one does have very good at-a-glance legibility. Though that one does come with an asterisk, and we'll talk about that into critique as well. Overall, I think the quality of this watch, I think the finishing, and of course this just being a prototype, I expect the production to be even better, but I think the finishing is great. I think the use of parts, the customization, the diamond cut hands, all of those kind of things, I think the finishing, the feel, it feels solid, it feels like a well-built watch, so I think you're getting a good bit for your money there. Additionally, the coating, I'm always a fan of those coatings. Anything that's going to help my watches to look new longer is great by me. I am very anal retentive. I'm definitely not one that beats up my tool watches. I do like to keep them looking new, so that's very welcome. And then finally, just the overall design. I think it fits well on the wrist. I think it's pretty size versatile. I think it's comfortable. Everything about it, I think, is pretty well done. But that's not to say it's without any faults, at least from my subjective opinion here. So for the critiques. First, I had mentioned we'd revisit the minute markers. On the bezel here, with alternating between the 3 and the 4, and this is that asterisk for the legibility, I will say, at a glance, you can misread with seeing the 3 and 4, and at least for me, maybe you're better about telling the time than I am, but when I see those markers, I sometimes would be a minute off from where I thought I actually was just at a glance, so it does take a little bit of getting used to if you have to go to the outside of the number for your 4th minute there. But that being said, it's a minor critique, just something for me personally that I would have preferred if it was 4 all around, though I understand that might have been a little bit crowded around the numerals. For the date color, I do generally prefer a color matched date window, so that would have been a nice touch. I think that would have really looked harmonious for a watch that already is cohesive. Yes, it blends as far as for the markers with having a white date window, though the coloration, of course, between BGW9 and a pure white is a little bit different. That's something I would have liked to have seen. The minute hand length, personally, I think that could have been kicked out a little more. The second hand, this is just a hair shy of the second hand. Second hand, I think is pretty good. I wouldn't mind that to be kicked out either. But that minute hand, you can see it does come almost to the outer edge. I think it could have stood to be just a little bit longer there. But again, this is pretty nitpicky stuff here. Just little items that I had to note. And then finally, the lug downturn. As I mentioned, this one does have a pronounced lug downturn. I have found for my particular wrist, I think this fits quite well overall. I have not found that to be an impediment. So this is my 6.5-inch wrist. I think it contours and hugs perfectly. However, if you're someone with a larger wrist, and particularly someone with a larger wrist that is bothered by lugs that stick out, these I don't think dig in. They do sit a little bit proud of the case back, as you can see here. But if you are not a fan of that with having a sharp downturn, that's something that might be bothersome or might be an annoyance to some. However, I think in general, I think most people would be happy, and I really honestly don't think it's an issue, even if you have a larger wrist, but it is something that I did want to note. So where does that leave us overall? The overall is, I think this, as we've talked about here, I think for what you're getting for the money, I think this is reasonably priced. And speaking of price, I completely neglected to mention that. The price on this one is going to be launching at $615, and this will be launching in September of 2021. The date is to be determined, so do stay tuned for that. I will have a link in the video description, so check that out. There's only going to be 350 of these, and these will be direct order, though it is a pre-order from Second Hour, but it's going to be a short ship lead time, so it will only be 6 to 8 weeks before they ship from ordering time. After, I believe, the first 10 days, these will go up to $725 for the full retail price. So back to the overall conclusion. So for that, I think you're getting a lot for your money with having the Sellita movement, the hardened coating, the overall design, the unique and custom parts throughout. I think you're getting your money's worth on this. And with the design, as I mentioned, I think it's a versatile design. I'm not personally a huge compressor style watch fan, but this is one that I liked. I thought it was nice to look at, and overall, I thought it was a well done piece. So finally, if you're looking for an all-around watch, if you've been wanting to add a compressor to your collection, or you just like this particular model, absolutely, I think you can order this without hesitation. I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy this, and you can please hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, it does help me tremendously. If you hit that subscribe button, I'll have new content coming all the time. And then finally, if you want to help the channel further, there is an Amazon affiliate links that are in the description. That does get me a small commission. And if you're looking to find me in another medium, Instagram. Thanks for watching.